Picture a crowded amphitheater under the open sky, the air buzzing with anticipation as actors take the stage. But this isn't just entertainment, it's a dangerous game of wit and survival. In societies where criticizing a ruler could mean exile or worse, ancient playwrights mastered the art of speaking truth without saying it outright. They turned theater into a shield, using laughter, symbolism, and myth to expose corruption and folly while keeping their heads firmly attached. Think about that for a moment. In a world without free speech, creativity became the ultimate loophole. From Athens to Rome, these dramatists were the original political satirists, crafting stories that audiences understood as thinly veiled jabs at the powerful. Aristophanes didn't just write comedies, he weaponized them, stuffing his scripts with exaggerated caricatures of greedy politicians and bumbling leaders. And the Romans, they hid their critiques in tales of gods and heroes, letting the crowd read between the lines. It was rebellion disguised as art, a way to spark conversation without sparking a revolt. The genius of it all, the very people being mocked often applauded loudest, too oblivious or proud to recognize themselves on stage. Why does this ancient sleight of hand matter today? Because the same tricks live on in our late-night comedy shows, political cartoons, and even viral memes. The tools have changed, but the game remains the same. Challenge authority without crossing the line. Over the next few minutes, we'll pull back the curtain on how these scripts worked, uncovering the clever wordplay, the daring symbolism, and the audacity of artists who refused to stay silent. This isn't just history, it's a masterclass in resistance, and you're about to see how the past still whispers to the present, ready to decode the secrets. Let's begin. At the heart of ancient Athens, where democracy and danger walked hand in hand, satire became a razor-sharp tool for the brave. Take Aristophanes' The Knights, a play so bold it didn't just mock a politician. It dressed him up as a buffoonish leather seller named Cleon, a man so corrupt he'd sell his own shadow. But here's the brilliance: by wrapping the insult in absurdity, the playwright gave the audience cover. Laughter was the perfect alibi. If someone accused you of spreading dissent, you could just shrug and say, "It's only a joke." And in a society that prided itself on free speech, at least in theory, punishing a comedian would make a leader look like a thin-skinned tyrant. The real power of these plays lay in their double meaning. The sausage seller who triumphs in The Knights isn't just a comedic underdog. He's a walking critique of how low Athenian politics had sunk. Imagine a modern-day parody where a fast food worker becomes president. It's ridiculous, but it stings because it's not entirely wrong. Aristophanes knew his audience would catch the subtext. If a clueless charlatan could rise to power, what did that say about the system that lifted him there? But satire wasn't just about tearing down the powerful. It was also a mirror for the public. When the crowd roared at Cleon's expense, they weren't just spectators, they were accomplices. Every laugh was a silent nod of agreement, a collective admission that the emperor had no clothes, and that's where the true risk lay. A dictator might ignore a lone critic, but a theater full of citizens laughing in unison. That was a threat no ruler could easily dismiss. Yet because the critique was wrapped in fiction, it slipped past the guards at the gate of censorship. This dance between humor and rebellion didn't stop at the stage. The play sparked conversations in the agora, in homes, even in the halls of power themselves. Cleon reportedly tried to sue Aristophanes, proof that the jokes hit their mark. But the very fact that the playwright survived to mock another day shows how effective the strategy was. Satire became a social pressure valve, letting steam escape before the pot could boil over. It's no accident that societies with the sharpest satirists often avoided the bloodiest revolts. When people can laugh at their leaders, they're less likely to lynch them. What's astonishing is how little has changed. Swap the amphitheater for a Twitter thread or a late-night monologue, and the playbook remains the same. Today's comedians still use exaggeration and irony to skewer the powerful, still rely on the crowd's complicity to amplify the message. The stakes might feel lower now, but the mechanism is identical. Humor disarms, then delivers the knife. Aristophanes would have loved memes. Allegory was the ultimate disguise, a way to cloak rebellion in the robes of myth. When Euripides wrote the Bacchae, he didn't set his story in Athens. He chose Thebes, a city of legend, where the god Dionysus punishes a king for denying his divine power. But every Athenian in the audience knew the real target, their own leader's arrogance. By shifting the setting, Euripides turned a dangerous critique into a safe fable. The moment Pentheus, the stubborn ruler, is torn apart by his own mother in a Dionysian frenzy, the message was unmistakable: defy the will of the people, and destruction follows. Yet because it was wrapped in supernatural drama, no one could accuse the playwright of sedition. This wasn't just clever storytelling, it was survival. Tyrants could silence a dissenter, but banning a tale about gods that risked offending the divine. Playwrights exploited this loophole mercilessly. Sophocles' Antigone, with its clash between moral duty and tyrannical law, wasn't just a tragedy, it was a debate about power dressed in Theban costumes. Even Aeschylus, writing decades earlier, used the Persian defeat in the Persians to subtly warn Athenians about the perils of their own growing imperialism. The enemy onstage was always a stand-in, a reflection the audience couldn't miss. The genius of allegory lay in its flexibility. A story about Hercules could be a jab at military overreach. A fable about Zeus might critique corruption in the courts. And because myths were shared cultural currency, the subtext resonated instantly. Imagine a modern filmmaker setting a critique of censorship in a dystopian future. Everyone gets the metaphor, but the setting provides deniability. That's why allegory thrived even under Rome's emperors, where direct criticism meant death. Seneca's Thyists, with its tale of a king fed his own children, wasn't just horror. It was a grotesque parody of imperial cruelty, safe because it was just a retelling of an old legend. But allegory's power came with a catch. It demanded a savvy audience. The playwrights relied on spectators to connect the dots, to see Creon's edicts in their own laws or Pentheus' pride in their leaders' faces. This created a silent pact between artist and audience, a shared act of interpretation that made the critique even more potent. When the crowd gasped as Agamemnon was betrayed upon returning home, they weren't just reacting to a story, they were acknowledging the parallel to their own war-weary society. What's striking is how this ancient tactic echoes today. From Animal Farm to The Handmaid's Tale, allegory remains a shield for dissent. The names and settings change, but the game is the same. Tell the truth slant, as Emily Dickinson wrote, and let the audience do the rest. The moment a ruler has to explain why a myth or a fairy tale is really about them, they've already lost. Because laughter can be dismissed, but a story that sticks in the imagination. That's a rebellion no decree can erase. The chorus wasn't just background noise, it was the ultimate Trojan horse. Picture this, a group of performers moving in unison, their voices rising in what seemed like solemn tradition. But hidden in their chants were truths too dangerous for any single actor to speak. In Antigone, when the chorus murmurs, "Wisdom is the supreme part of happiness," it sounds like pious advice until you realize it's a direct rebuke to Creon's reckless pride. They played the role of loyal citizens, nodding along to authority while weaving doubt into every stanza. The trick, ambiguity. A ruler hearing these lines could choose to take them at face value, but the audience knew better. This collective voice gave playwrights a unique advantage. Unlike a protagonist who could be dismissed as a rogue or malcontent, the chorus represented society itself. Their words carried the weight of communal judgment, dressed in the rhythms of ritual. When they warned of the god's wrath or praised moderation, it wasn't just commentary, it was a coded referendum on the ruler's actions. And because choral odes were rooted in religious and civic tradition, censoring them risked blasphemy as much as sedition. The chorus also served as the audience's guide, nudging them to read between the lines. In Oedipus Rex, their horrified reaction to the king's self-blinding isn't just drama, it's a masterclass in dramatic irony. They gasp, "Too terrible to see, too terrible to hear," forcing spectators to confront the consequences of Oedipus' hubris. By reacting with shock, they signal to the crowd, this is what happens when power goes unchecked. Yet on the surface, they're merely observing the plot unfold. Rome borrowed this tactic, but with a twist. Seneca's choruses often lamented fate or moral decay, safe topics that nonetheless echoed contemporary scandals. When his Medea chorus decries, "No oath of men is sacred now," it's a blanket statement about human nature unless you're Nero's advisor, sweating in the front row. The brilliance lay in the chorus's ability to universalize critique. A tyrant might tolerate a general complaint about corruption, not realizing the crowd was applying it directly to him. What's fascinating is how this ancient device mirrors modern dissent. Think of protest songs where a choir sings about justice, neutral on the surface, but electrifying in context. Or the way viral hashtags create a collective voice too diffused to silence. The chorus proved that rebellion doesn't always need a single face. Sometimes it's most powerful when it's everyone and no one at once. Yet the chorus had one final trick: plausible deniability. If challenged, the playwright could insist, they're just recounting myths, much like a satirist today might say, it's just a joke. But in the echo of those shared verses, the real message rang clear. When the crowd joined in the chorus's refrains during festivals, they weren't just reciting lines, they were rehearsing resistance. And that's the quiet genius of it all. Dissent disguised as tradition is the hardest kind to erase. Rome's emperors held life and death power over artists, but playwrights turned history into a weapon. Take Seneca's Thyists on the surface. It's just another bloody myth about a king tricked into eating his own children. But in Nero's Rome, where the emperor famously poisoned his stepbrother and flaunted his decadence, the parallels were impossible to miss. Seneca didn't need to name names. The story itself was the accusation. By setting his critique in the distant past, he gave the audience a map to decode the present. Every mention of tyranny, every gasp at Atreus' cruelty became a silent indictment of the palace on the Palatine Hill. This wasn't subtlety, it was survival. Direct criticism meant the executioner's blade, but history offered deniability. When a character in Octavia, a play likely written after Seneca's death, lamented, "Kingship and love do not go well together," Rome's elite heard the jab at Nero's scandalous affair with Poppaea. The genius lay in the double audience. Those in the know caught the message, while the emperor could pretend it was just entertainment. It's the same tactic modern journalists use when criticizing dictators through foreign reporting. Everyone understands, but no one can prove intent. Roman playwrights mastered another trick: flattery as camouflage. Praising a dead emperor's virtues, say Augustus' moderation, was a safe way to highlight the current ruler's vices by contrast. Pliny the Younger perfected this in his speeches, waxing poetic about Trajan's humility while everyone remembered Domitian's paranoia. The subtext screamed louder than the text. Even the Satirican, Patronage raucous novel of orgies and greed functioned as satire because its excesses mirrored Nero's court too closely to be coincidence. The moment art holds up a funhouse mirror to power, the reflection stings. Yet Rome's censors weren't fools. They knew these games were being played, which makes the playwright's success even more remarkable. The key was plausible ambiguity. A line like "power shows the man" could be read as wisdom or warning, depending on who listened. And because Roman elites prized literary sophistication, calling out the subtext risked looking crude or paranoid. Imagine a modern politician complaining that a Saturday Night Live sketch was really about them. It's an admission of guilt wrapped in thin skin. The legacy of these tactics stretches far beyond antiquity. From Shakespeare's Richard Roman III, a not-so-subtle take on Tudor propaganda, to the Crucible's allegory of McCarthyism, history remains the go-to cloak for dissent. What Rome proved is that tyranny can ban the truth, but it can't erase the past, and when artists mine that past for parallels, they turn dusty scrolls into ticking time bombs. The audience becomes the detonator. Religious festivals weren't just celebrations, they were political minefields disguised as piety. In Athens, the Dionysia festival transformed the city into a stage where playwrights could say the unsayable, shielded by the god's own name. Imagine the irony: a ruler sitting in the front row, forced to applaud a play mocking his policies because to object would insult Dionysus himself. The festival's sacred aura became a force field against retaliation. When Aristophanes staged Lysistrata with its bold anti-war message during the Peloponnesian War, the generals couldn't cry treason without risking divine wrath. The audience knew the stakes. This wasn't just theater, it was dissent with spiritual insurance. Rome's ludi festivals worked the same magic. Emperor Augustus might have controlled the courts, but even he hesitated to censor a play performed in Jupiter's honor. The Ludi Romani featured comedies where slaves outwitted masters and politicians were lampooned subversive stuff in a rigidly hierarchical society. Yet because these performances were woven into religious ritual, shutting them down would have been sacrilege. Playwrights exploited this loophole ruthlessly, packing their scripts with lines that would have landed them in prison any other day. A character lamenting, "The gods will punish greed," might draw cheers from the crowd and tight smiles from the wealthy elites in attendance. The brilliance of this system lay in its reciprocity. Rulers tolerated the satire because the festivals also reinforced their authority. In Athens, the pre-play ceremonies showcased tributes from allied cities, a reminder of Athenian power. In Rome, the Ludi celebrated military victories, binding art to imperial propaganda. Playwrights got their platform, and leaders got their pageantry, a delicate balance where dissent was allowed but contained. Yet everyone understood the unspoken rule. The festival's sacred frame was both shield and shackle. Push too far, and even Dionysus might not save you. What's fascinating is how these ancient festivals mirror modern, safe spaces. For critique, think of comedy, roasts or award show monologues, where truth-telling is excused as tradition. The Dionysia proved that the most effective censorship evasion isn't stealth but spectacle. When criticism becomes ritual, power can't silence it without silencing itself. And that's the ultimate irony. The very ceremonies meant to uphold authority also gave citizens the tools to question it. The gods, it seems, have always had a sense of humor. Tragedy's power lay in its duality, mourning the fallen while warning the living. Aeschylus the Persians didn't just depict the downfall of a foreign empire, it held up a cracked mirror to Athens' own ambitions. When the chorus wails, pride blooms into ruin, the words resonate far beyond Persia's shores, the genius framing critique as pity. By portraying Xerxes' defeat with solemn gravity, Aeschylus could smuggle in a dangerous question. What if our own hubris leads us here? The audience left the theatre unsettled, their triumph over Persia now shadowed by unease about their city's growing thirst for power. This wasn't just storytelling, it was psychological judo. Tragedians weaponized the audience's empathy, making them grieve for enemies as a way to interrogate their own actions. In the Trojan Women, Euripides forces Athenians to weep for the very people their allies were slaughtering in Melos. The play's relentless focus on Hecuba's suffering transforms her from a mythical queen into a stand-in for every civilian crushed by war. And because the medium demanded solemnity, no politician could dismiss it as mere provocation. A lament wasn't protest, it was piety. The tragic structure itself became a delivery system for dissent. The relentless downward spiral pride, folly, catastrophe served as a civic object lesson. When Creon in Antigone insists, the state is the ship and only the captain may steer, his eventual ruin screams the rebuttal, absolute power sinks kingdoms. Even the gods' interventions functioned as political commentary. Divine punishment in these plays rarely struck the just, it toppled tyrants. The message coiled beneath every prophecy, leadership without humility invites disaster. Rome adapted this tactic with chilling precision. Seneca's Phaedra might seem like a myth about forbidden love, but its depiction of a royal house rotting from within echoed Nero's own court. The real masterstroke, tragedians never had to say, "This is about you." The genre's fatalism did the work. By presenting downfall as inevitable, they made critique feel like destiny, not defiance. A ruler hearing, "Kings rise only to fall," could nod sagely, never realizing the line was aimed at his own throat. What makes tragic irony so enduring is its refusal to simplify. Unlike satire's blunt force, tragedy wraps its blows in layers of ambiguity. When Oedipus vows to hunt Thebes' polluter, unaware he's the culprit, the audience's dread isn't just for him, it's for any leader too blind to see their own flaws. That's why these plays still unsettle us today. The moment we recognize ourselves in the protagonist's fatal blindness, the critique transcends time. The stage becomes a confessional, and the crowd leaves absolved but altered exactly as the playwright intended. The fool's babbling was never just noise, it was a razor wrapped in rags. In Roman comedies, when Plautus slaves stumbled onto stage, slurring their words and tripping over their own feet, the elite laughed at the caricature until they realized the joke was on them. These so-called idiots had a unique license. They could call a master greedy, mock a senator's vanity, or even question the gods, all while the crowd roared. Because here's the twist: the moment a fool's words were taken seriously, the accuser revealed their own insecurity. What ruler wants to admit a drunkard's slurred rant hit a nerve? Take the character of Pseudolus, the scheming slave who outwits his owner in a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. His antics seem harmless until you notice how often he wins. Every time he dupes the wealthy, the play whispers a dangerous idea. Maybe the social order isn't so fixed after all. The real brilliance: Plautus made the elite pay to watch their own absurdity. The same aristocrats who'd punish a philosopher for questioning hierarchy gladly applauded a fool doing the same because laughter let them save face. This wasn't confined to Rome. Shakespeare's Jester's Fest, Touchstone, the Fool in King Lear all wielded the same weapon, truth disguised as nonsense. When Lear's fool quips, "Thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise," it's not just a jab at the king's senility, it's a scathing critique of power unchecked by wisdom. Yet because the line is delivered with a jingle and a cap of bells, the court can't react without looking petty. The fool's costume became armor, his rhymes a Trojan horse for rebellion. What's fascinating is how this dynamic persists across cultures. The medieval court jester, the Native American heyoka, even the modern stand-up comical, all share that same sacred, irreverent space. They're allowed to break taboos because their role demands it, but beneath the antics lies a darker truth. Societies often grant the marginalized the right to speak precisely because they're seen as inconsequential. The fool's privilege is a backhanded compliment. You can say anything because no one has to listen. Yet history shows we do listen. The barbs stick precisely because they're delivered with a grin. When a slave in Plautus the pot of gold declares, "The rich are just beggars with better disguises," the line lingers long after the laughter fades. That's the ultimate subversion. The fool's words, dismissed in the moment, ferment in the public mind. By sunrise, a drunkard's jest becomes a philosopher's thesis, and the powerful realize, too late, that they've been outsmarted by the clown they paid to ignore. Euripides' Medea wasn't just a tragedy, it was a time bomb disguised as heritage. When the sorceress murders her own children to punish her betraying husband, the horror isn't just mythical. It's a reflection of Athens' own moral fractures. Written during the Peloponnesian War, a period of rampant political backstabbing and abandoned alliances, the play's central theme, the cost of broken vows struck a nerve no contemporary story could safely touch. By setting the drama in Corinth with legendary figures, Euripides gave his audience deniability. They could weep for Medea while silently condemning the generals and diplomats breaking trust daily in their own city. The mask of myth let them confront uncomfortable truths without naming names. This wasn't unique to Medea. Playwrights routinely plundered the past to critique the present. Consider Sophocles' Philoctetes, where the Greek army abandons a wounded soldier for convenience, a clear parallel to Athens' treatment of veterans. Or Hecuba, another Euripides' gut punch, where a queen's vengeance against her child's murderer mirrors the cycle of violence consuming Greece. The genius lay in the double layer. Audiences absorbed the message as universal rather than personal, while those in power couldn't protest without confessing the parallels applied to them. Banning these plays would be like banning Homer, unthinkable in a culture that revered its myths. Rome took this tactic further, weaponizing nostalgia. When Ovid wrote Metamorphoses, his tales of gods punishing mortals for hubris weren't just entertainment, they were veiled warnings to Augustus about the dangers of absolute power. The emperor eventually exiled him, proving how potent the strategy was. But even then, Ovid's exile couldn't erase the poems already circulating, their subversive themes embedded in harmless stories of Daphne or Arachne. The moment myth becomes allegory, it outlives its creator. What makes this mirroring so effective is its emotional alchemy. A direct editorial about political betrayal might provoke anger, but Medea's grief transforms outrage into empathy. By the time Jason gets his comeuppance, the audience isn't just condemning one man, they're questioning an entire system that rewards treachery. And that's the real power of mythological distancing. It lets truth bypass the brain's defenses and strike straight at the heart. When a ruler finally realizes the crowd's tears for Icarus are really tears for his own fallen policies, it's already too late. The story has done its work. Modern storytellers still use this ancient playbook. From Game of Thrones echoing medieval power struggles to the Hunger Games refracting modern inequality through dystopian fantasy, the safest way to critique power is to dress it in dragons or sci-fi. The names change, but the game remains the same. Let the audience connect the dots and the message becomes unstoppable. Because when art holds up a mirror, even tyrants hesitate to smash their own reflection. Wealthy patrons didn't just fund plays, they built the stage for rebellion while holding the leash. Take the case of The Clouds, where Aristophanes lampooned Socrates as a babbling sophist. but the real target was Athens' entire elite class chasing intellectual fads. The joke, the play, was likely bankrolled by one of those very elites, laughing as long as the satire aimed slightly to their left. This was the tightrope playwrights walked, biting the hand that fed them without drawing blood. The patron's name might grace the program, but the audience knew who else was in the crosshairs. Patronage wasn't charity, it was a calculated gamble. Rich sponsors gained prestige by associating with acclaimed playwrights, but they also risked hosting their own roasting. Imagine a modern billionaire funding a comedy special only for the comedian to spend half the runtime mocking billionaire greed. That's the paradox at play. Money enabled dissent, but only if the critique stayed just vague enough to maintain plausible deniability. When Aristophanes ridiculed Cleon in the Knights, he didn't need to name his patron's rival directly. The crowd filled in the blanks. The patron got revenge, the playwright got paid, and the public got catharsis, all without a single explicit accusation. Yet this system had teeth. Playwrights who crossed invisible lines faced sudden withdrawals of support. Euripides, despite his fame, died in exile, rumored to have offended one patron too many. The unspoken rule was clear: satire could graze the powerful but never gore them. That's why so many plays layered their critiques: mock Socrates to skewer educators, mock generals to critique war, mock gods to question tradition. Each jab was a feint, allowing patrons to shrug and say, "It's just a play about philosophers," while the audience smirked at the broader implications. Rome refined this dance into high art. Seneca's tragedies, written under Nero's reign, were masterclasses in misdirection. His Phaedra might condemn lust and tyranny, but Nero, a patron who fancied himself an artist, couldn't protest without admitting the shoe fit. The trick: flattery as camouflage. By dedicating plays to the emperor's enlightened taste, Seneca kept his head while planting seeds of dissent. The moment a patron starts believing they're too sophisticated to be the butt of the joke, they've already lost. What's striking is how little the game has changed. Modern artists still rely on wealthy backers, studio executives, gallery owners, streaming platforms, to fund work that often critiques the very systems those patrons represent. The difference: ancient playwrights didn't have the luxury of hashtags or viral outrage. Their survival depended on making the powerful laugh just hard enough to miss the sting. And that's the real lesson of patronage. The best dissidents aren't the ones who shout in the streets, but those who convince the elite to pay for the microphone. The laughter rippling through the amphitheater wasn't just amusement. It was a silent pact between playwright and audience, a coded language of collective defiance. Imagine the scene. An actor delivers a line about leaders who sell promises like cheap wine, and suddenly the crowd erupts. No one needs to point fingers. The recognition is instantaneous. This was the alchemy of ancient theater. The moment a joke landed, the spectators became co-conspirators, their laughter 1,000 tiny acts of rebellion. The real power wasn't in the script alone, but in the shared understanding that flickered across the faces in the crowd. This complicity transformed passive viewers into active participants. When Aristophanes mocked Cleon's vanity in The Wasps, the laughter wasn't just at the character's expense, it was a public verdict. Every chuckle ratified the critique, turning the theater into a courtroom where the audience served as both jury and witness. And here's the twist: the more people laughed, the safer the message became. A ruler could punish one dissenter, but how do you arrest an entire city for finding something funny? The crowd's reaction created a buffer of deniability. Playwrights could shrug and say, "It's just a comedy," while the audience's reaction proved it was anything but. The brilliance of this dynamic lay in its reciprocity. Playwrights trusted the crowd to decode subtext, and the crowd trusted the playwright to deliver it safely. Take the Frogs, where Dionysus journeys to the underworld to bring back a great poet, a plot that slyly questioned Athens' cultural decline. The moment the chorus sang, "It's the mark of a fool to prefer a bad leader," the crowd's cheers turned allegory into accusation. Yet because the critique was wrapped in myth and music, no single person could be held responsible. Dissent became a chorus, not a solo. Rome mastered this dance with even higher stakes. Under emperors like Nero, a play's subtext could mean life or death. When a character in Octavia muttered, "Kings who fear poets should rule better," the audience's collective gasp was the real punchline. The line itself was innocuous, but the stifled laughter, the exchanged glances, the tense silence, that's where the rebellion lived. The theater became a hall of mirrors, reflecting back the emperor's paranoia while hiding the dissent in plain sight. What's remarkable is how this ancient strategy thrives today. Think of a stand-up comic pausing after a politically charged joke, the crowd's laughter confirming they've all caught the subtext. Or a viral meme where the caption says one thing, but the shared understanding says another. The tools have changed, but the human instinct remains. When we laugh together at power, we're not just entertained, we're united. And that's the secret weapon playwrights understood. A joke might fade, but the solidarity it sparks, that's what keeps rulers awake at night. Divine characters became the ultimate mouthpieces for dissent after all. Who dares interrupt a god? In Prometheus Bound, when the Titan roars that Zeus rules through fear rather than justice, the line blurs between myth and manifesto. But here's the genius: attacking a deity wasn't sedition, it was sacred discourse. Playwrights hid their boldest critiques in the mouths of immortals, knowing that even the most paranoid tyrant wouldn't risk silencing a pious debate about divine rule. The moment Prometheus sneers that Zeus distributes justice like a drunken king, the audience hears two messages at once, one about Olympus and another about the throne in their own city. This theological loophole turned the gods into paradoxical allies. Dionysus in the Bacchae isn't just a god demanding worship, he's an embodiment of the people's will, crushing a ruler who denies their ecstasy. By framing resistance as divine retribution, Euripides made rebellion feel inevitable, even righteous. And because the gods' actions were beyond human judgment, their critiques carried a weight no mortal character could muster. When Athena in the Eumenides declares, "No throne can stand without the people's love," it sounds like celestial wisdom unless you're a leader hearing it as a threat. Rome took this further, deifying emperors while letting playwrights mock the gods. Seneca's Hercules Furens shows Juno's petty vengeance, a barely veiled jab at imperial hypocrisy. The irony: the same rulers who demanded worship tolerated these portrayals because censoring them would undermine the very divine authority they claimed. So Hercules might rant against the heavens and the crowd would cheer, knowing the real target sat draped in purple on the palace hill. The brilliance of this divine cover was its flexibility. A chorus lamenting "the gods grow cruel" could be mourning fate or hinting at a tyrant's excesses. Even better, the gods often lost in these plays. In the Bacchae, Pentheus is torn apart. In Prometheus Bound, Zeus' victim outsmarts him. These weren't just stories, they were wish fulfillment, letting audiences watch absolute power humiliated without consequence. What's startling is how this ancient tactic echoes in modern allegories. From Watchmen's Doctor, Manhattan to the Good Place's afterlife bureaucracy, supernatural characters still deliver truths too dangerous for mortals to voice. Because when critique comes from a god, a robot, or an alien, it's not rebellion, it's just good storytelling. And that's the real lesson. The best dissent wears the mask of myth, letting audiences confront tyranny without ever saying its name. A king struts onto the stage, his crown so ludicrously large it wobbles with each step, while his robes drag through the dirt, no words needed. In ancient theater, costumes weren't just decoration, they were punchlines stitched into fabric. That oversized crown, a slap at rulers drunk on power. The warrior's shield, flimsy as parchment, a wink at military bluster. These visual gags turned every garment into a silent co-conspirator, ensuring even those who couldn't read the plays could read the ridicule. Take Aristophanes' The Birds, where Athenian bureaucrats arrive dressed as overwrought roosters, their bellies straining against feathered suits. The moment they waddle onstage, the audience roars, not just at the absurdity, but at the recognition. These weren't just birds, they were politicians stripped of their dignity, reduced to clucking caricatures. The genius lay in the simplicity, satire you could see, bypassing language barriers and literacy limits. A slave in the back row might miss a clever pun, but he couldn't miss the irony of a general's armor polished to a shine, while his knees knocked in fear. Rome elevated this visual wit to high art. In Plautus the braggart soldier, the titular character's breastplate is so exaggeratedly sculpted it resembles a barrel, his helmet crest tall enough to scrape the stage rafters. Every strut, every preening gesture underscored the joke. This wasn't a hero, but a hollow man playing dress-up. And because the costume did half the work, the playwright could push boundaries further in the dialogue. When the soldier boasted of his conquests, the audience's eyes flicked to his comically tiny sword, a visual punchline that made the subtext bulletproof. But costumes could also whisper what scripts dared not shout. In Euripides' The Trojan Women, Hecuba's once regal robes hang in tatters, the fabrics unraveling mirroring her city's collapse. No monologue about loss could sting as sharply as the sight of her trembling fingers clutching frayed threads. Even the masks, with their frozen expressions, became tools of dissent. A tyrant's mask might sneer permanently, while the chorus's identical faces emphasized the anonymity of the oppressed individual voices swallowed by the collective. The real power of these silent jabs, they forced complicity. When a Roman audience laughed at a senator character tripping over his own toga, they weren't just mocking a costume mishap, they were acknowledging the system's absurdity. And that's why rulers tolerated it. Banning a play was one thing, but banning a hat that risked looking ridiculous. So the costumes stayed, their stitches holding together more than just fabric. They sewed dissent into the very fabric of the culture. Today's political cartoons and protest art owe their lineage to those ancient threads, proving that sometimes the sharpest critiques come without a single word. Exile didn't silence Ovid, it weaponized his words. When Augustus banished him to the Black Sea's edge, the emperor thought he was erasing a nuisance. Instead, he created a legend. From that remote outpost, Ovid penned The Art of Love, a poem dripping with irony. On the surface, it's a cheeky guide to seduction, full of witty advice like, "Love is a battlefield, arm yourself." But read between the lines, and it's a scathing parody of Augustus' own moral reforms, laws that micromanaged everything from adultery to dinner party guest lists. By framing his critique as frivolous entertainment, Ovid turned his exile into a megaphone. Every scroll smuggled back to Rome carried a whispered question. If the emperor's so secure, why does he fear a poet's pen? Censorship's great irony is how often it amplifies the very ideas it tries to suppress. Ovid's exile transformed him from a court darling into a symbol of artistic resistance. His works, once read in elite salons, now circulated in taverns and market squares, passed hand to hand like contraband. The more Augustus tried to scrub the art of love from public memory, the more it became a badge of defiance. Imagine a modern dictator banning a novel, only to see it become an underground bestseller. That's the power of forbidden fruit. Ovid understood this perfectly. His letters from exile, dripping with faux remorse, only stoked the fire. "I write to survive," he claimed, while every line subtly mocked the regime that exiled him. But Ovid wasn't alone in this game. Across the ancient world, banned artists turned persecution into propaganda. When the Greek playwright Phrynichus was fined for staging the sack of Miletus, a tragedy too raw for Athenians fresh from war, his punishment became part of the play's legacy. The very act of suppression branded the story as taboo, ensuring its themes lingered in public discourse. Rome's emperors repeated this mistake for centuries. Nero exiled Seneca, only to find his stoic writings on tyranny quoted by senators plotting coups. The pattern was clear. Exile didn't erase dissent, it gave it a mailing address. What's fascinating is how these exiled voices weaponized nostalgia. Ovid's Tristia, written in exile, paints Rome as a lost paradise, a literary sleight of hand that forced readers to contrast the city's idealized past with its grim present under Augustus. It's the oldest trick in the book: make people miss something and they'll start questioning what took it away. Modern dissidents still use this tactic, from Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago to punk bands smuggling lyrics past censors. The lesson: when you drive art underground, it doesn't disappear. It mutates into something far more dangerous. Yet the cruelest twist was saved for Augustus himself. By the time he died, his moral laws were remembered chiefly as the petty grievances that exiled Rome's greatest poet. The art of love outlasted his reforms, its verses quoted at the very parties his laws tried to regulate. Power could banish a man, but it couldn't control where his words would land. And that's the exile's final revenge. They may take your home, but they can't unwrite what you've sown in the minds of the people. Every smuggled scroll was a seed, and history's soil is fertile. Lysistrata's demand for peace and Medea's chilling vengeance should have shaken Athens to its core, yet these incendiary words spilled from the mouths of men. That was the loophole: male actors donning female masks to voice what real women couldn't say without consequences. The moment a bearded performer stepped into Medea's sandals, her declaration, "I'd rather stand 3 times in battle than bear 1 child," became theater, not treason. The disguise worked both ways. Audiences could absorb radical critiques of marriage, war, or power structures while dismissing them as mere fiction. After all, how seriously could you take a woman's perspective when everyone knew it was just a man in a wig? This performative distance gave playwrights extraordinary freedom. Aristophanes' Lysistrata, where women withhold sex to end a war, wasn't just comedy, it was a grenade rolled into the symposium. But because men delivered every line, the satire gained immunity. Imagine the cognitive dissonance. Athenian citizens laughing as male actors impersonated wives plotting against them, all while real women in the audience sat silently, their own voices legally barred from public life. The irony was delicious and deliberate. By filtering feminist rebellion through male performers, the play let men confront their own hypocrisy without losing face. The mask itself became a tool of subversion. In Euripides' Medea, the actor's exaggerated female mask, wide-eyed and frozen in anguish, amplified the character's otherness, making her actions seem fantastical. Yet beneath the artifice, the script forced uncomfortable questions. What drove a mother to filicide? Was it madness, or the brutal choices a patriarchal system left her? The male actor's presence created psychological distance, allowing the audience to engage with these taboos safely. They could pity Medea without fearing her, discuss her crimes without condoning them. It was empathy at arm's length, close enough to feel, far enough to deny. Rome took this further, using cross-gender performance to mock and mollify. When Plautus the Pot of Gold featured a slave impersonating a wealthy matron, the joke wasn't just about class, it highlighted how performative gender roles were. The actor's clumsy attempts to walk in heels and mimic feminine gestures exposed the absurdity of rigid social codes, and because the humor came from male performers exaggerating femininity, the critique slipped past censors. The moment a man minced across the stage, fluttering a fan, the audience roared, but some left wondering why real women faced punishment for behaving the same way. What's revelatory is how this ancient sleight of hand echoes today. From Shakespeare's boy actors playing Juliet to modern drag performances that critique gender norms, the stage has always been a space to try on dangerous ideas. The moment a male body speaks a woman's truth, the rules bend. Ancient playwrights understood this power instinctively. Let a man say what a woman cannot, and suddenly the unspeakable becomes entertainment. But the real magic, somewhere between the mask and the applause, the fiction starts to feel like prophecy. A Persian king storms across the stage, his golden robes swirling as he orders the execution of innocent hostages, the perfect villain, safely distant in time and geography. But the Athenian audience, shifting uneasily in their seats, understood the unspoken parallel, their own leaders' brutal siege tactics during the Peloponnesian War. This was the decoy villain in action, a narrative sleight of hand that let playwrights attack contemporary tyranny while pointing the finger at convenient outsiders. Aeschylus the Persians didn't just depict Xerxes' defeat at Salamis, it held up a warped mirror to Athens' own imperial ambitions, asking, what separates us from the empires we conquer? The answer, whispered between the lines, stung far more than any direct accusation. The brilliance of this tactic lay in its plausible deniability. When a chorus lamented the hubris of foreign rulers, politicians could nod along piously, oblivious that their own policies were being indicted. Take Euripides, the Trojan women on the surface, a tragedy about Greek cruelty toward fallen enemies, but staged in 415 BCE, just months after Athens slaughtered the men of Milos and enslaved their women, the play's subtext was explosive. Hecuba's cry, "You Greeks invent barbarian crimes, then call us barbarians," wasn't about Troy, it was about Milos and every other city crushed under Athenian boots. Yet because the villains wore Trojan costumes, no one could officially protest without admitting the resemblance. Rome refined this strategy with surgical precision. When Seneca wrote Theists, his portrait of a king feasting on his children's flesh wasn't just mythological horror, it was a grotesque parody of imperial family politics under Claudius and Nero. The Decoy, the play, was set in Mycenae's mythical past, its cannibalism safely ensconced in legend. But Roman audiences recognized the flavors of their own court, the poisonings, the betrayals, the insatiable hunger for power. By displacing the villainy onto ancient Greece, Seneca dodged the executioner's blade while making the truth inescapable. This ancient bait and switch thrives in modern storytelling. From Star Wars using a galactic empire to critique real-world fascism to the Hunger Games disguising class warfare as dystopian fiction, the decoy villain remains a storyteller's best ally. The moment a ruler complains, "This fictional tyrant isn't about me," they've already confirmed the resemblance, and that's the ultimate power of displacement. It forces introspection where direct critique would only spark defiance. When the audience leaves the theater whispering, "That Persian king, he reminded me of someone," the story has done its work without ever breaking character. The oracle's voice dripped with honeyed vagueness, each syllable a trapdoor leading to doom. In Oedipus Rex, when the seer proclaims, "The killer you seek is the killer you are," the truth hides in plain sight, just like the edicts politicians crafted to confuse their enemies. Ancient playwrights knew prophecies weren't just plot devices. They were mirrors held up to the doublespeak of real-life rulers. Every time a king onstage scoffed at a riddle, certain he could outsmart fate, the audience glimpsed their own leader's arrogance. The real joke: those in power fell for the same tricks they used on the people. Consider the Delphic oracle's famous tactic answers so slippery they guaranteed misinterpretation. "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall," could mean victory or ruin depending on who paid the priestess. Playwrights lifted this script straight from politics. When Creon in Antigone declares, "The state is the ship and only the captain may steer," it sounds noble until you realize the ship is heading for cliffs and the captain refuses to listen to warnings. The audience hears the unspoken truth. Laws, like prophecies, are designed to be bent. Rome perfected this game of linguistic smoke and mirrors. Emperors issued decrees stuffed with loopholes. All taxes shall be just, knowing their officials would define just as whatever filled the treasury. Seneca parodied this in Oedipus, where the prophecy, "You will kill your father," becomes a self-fulfilling nightmare because no one questions the wording. The punchline: the same rulers who mocked Oedipus for his blindness were busy misreading their own advisors' warnings. The deeper genius lay in the audience's complicity. When a chorus chanted, "Gods speak in riddles to test the wise," the crowd caught the jab at leaders who twisted simple truths into pretzels. It was satire wearing a prophet's robes, safe because the powerful couldn't admit they were the butt of the joke without confessing to the manipulation. Even today, when a politician claims mistakes were made without naming who made them, the ghost of Delphi smiles. The more things change, the more they stay oracular. Aristophanes didn't just mock politicians, he turned them into grotesque cartoons, their flaws inflated to monstrous proportions. Picture Cleon in the Knights, not just greedy but a literal flesh-eating cyclops, his single eye bulging as he devours public funds. The exaggeration wasn't just for laughs, it was a magnifying glass held over corruption, warping reality just enough to reveal its true shape. When a leader protests, "I don't actually breathe fire," the audience howls not because they believe the lie, but because they recognize the smaller, uglier truth beneath the absurdity. This comic alchemy transformed satire into social X-ray. In The Wasps, jurors become ravenous insects, swarming to court not for justice but for the petty thrill of condemning others. The image is ridiculous old men with stingers and wings, yet it lays bare the addiction to power lurking beneath Athens' legal system. The genius hyperbole forces introspection. A politician might dismiss a measured critique, but when he's portrayed as a donkey braying nonsense from the podium, the caricature lingers. The more outlandish the metaphor, the harder it becomes to unsee the resemblance. Rome's Plautus wielded the same weapon, stretching flaws until they snap. In The Braggart Soldier, Piergopolinus isn't just vain. His muscles are so exaggerated they need their own zip code. Every boast about his conquests becomes a mirror for Rome's own militaristic bluster. The audience roars as he trips over his ego, but the subtext stings. Conquest without virtue is just performance. And when the soldier's lies unravel, it's not just a comic climax, it's a verdict on empire itself. The real power of hyperbole lies in its immunity to rebuttal. Attack a play for depicting leaders as monsters, and you only confirm the metaphor. Like a funhouse mirror, it reflects not your face but your essence. Modern comedians still use this ancient trick. Think of dictators portrayed as toddlers with nukes, or CEOs as literal vampires. The moment a ruler says, "That's not me." While adjusting the crown the cartoonist drew crooked, the joke wins, because the best satire doesn't just mock, it dares power to deny the ridiculous truth staring back at it. The final curtain falls, but the story refuses to end neatly. That was the playwright's last act of defiance. In Antigone, when Creon stumbles offstage, broken and alone after his son and wife take their own lives, the audience is left clutching a question with no answer. Was this divine justice or senseless waste? The genius of this ambiguity is its quiet power. By refusing to moralize, Sophocles forced every spectator to become the judge. A ruler watching might squirm, wondering, is this my fate if I refuse to bend? While citizens exchanged glances, weighing whether their own leader deserved Creon's torment, the play's unresolved ending wasn't an oversight. It was a trapdoor swinging open beneath the audience's assumptions. This deliberate uncertainty transformed theatre into a communal Rorschach test. Euripides the Bacchae closes with Dionysus vanishing into the ether, leaving Thebes in ruins and the chorus murmuring, "The gods work in ways we cannot grasp." Is this a warning against resisting change or a bitter lesson in celestial cruelty? The beauty lies in the duality. A tyrant could nod, thinking it justified his iron grip, while rebels saw vindication for their cause. Open endings didn't just allow multiple interpretations, they weaponized them. Like a prism held to light, the same scene fractured into countless truths depending on who held it. Rome's playwrights took this further, using ambiguity as a shield. When Seneca's Thyest ends with the sun reversing its course, a grotesque symbol of nature itself rejecting Atreus' crimes, the audience is left gasping. Does the cosmic horror signal inevitable retribution for tyranny, or merely the world's indifference? The lack of resolution was the point. In an empire where definitive critiques meant death, unanswered questions became survival tools. A senator could debate the ending with his peers, each finding in it what they feared or hoped for, while the emperor's spies found nothing concrete to report. What makes these open endings so enduring is their psychological grip. A tidy moral would fade, but a haunting question lingers like smoke. Think of modern films like Inception's spinning top. Audiences still argue its meaning years later. Ancient playwrights understood this instinct first. The human mind craves closure, so denying it ensures the story lives on in whispered debates long after the actor's exit. When spectators left the amphitheater arguing whether Creon deserved pity or scorn, the play's critique seeped into the city's bloodstream. Rebellion wasn't staged, it was sparked in the unresolved silence between the lines. The ultimate brilliance, these endings let art implicate the audience without ever pointing a finger. No one had to agree on the right interpretation, the friction itself was the dissent. Like a stone tossed into a pond, the ripples spread farther because no hand reached in to stop them. And that's the unspoken contract of ambiguity. The moment you demand a clear answer, you admit the story has already unsettled you. Anonymous scripts were the ancient world's version of a VPN, shielding dissent behind layers of collective authorship. Imagine a play premieres in Athens, its barbs aimed squarely at the city's most corrupt general. But when officials storm backstage demanding the playwright's head, they're met with shrugs. No one claims sole ownership. The script, they're told, was a group effort polished by one hand, tweaked by another, with jokes inserted by a third. This wasn't just creative collaboration, it was strategic ambiguity. By scattering responsibility like seeds in the wind, writers made censorship a game of whack-a-mole. Punish one contributor, and a dozen others would vanish into the crowd, their ideas already replicated in the memories of every audience member. The tactic thrived in Rome's underground theater circuits, where scripts circulated unsigned or under pseudonyms like Senex, Old Man, or Amicus, Friend. When Nero's agents raided a performance mocking his golden palace, they found the actors genuinely didn't know who'd written the lines the script had passed through too many hands. This collective ownership wasn't accidental. It mirrored the way folktales and drinking songs evolved organically, absorbing each teller's flourishes. The moment a joke or critique entered the communal bloodstream, it became untraceable. Modern parallels leap to mind. Groups like the Yes Men activists who impersonate corporate spokespeople to expose greed operate on the same principle. When their satirical stunts go viral, no single member takes the fall. The collective absorbs the backlash. Even online meme culture functions this way. An idea mutates too rapidly for any one creator to be targeted. The ancient playwrights would have adored Twitter's retweet button, the ultimate dilution of accountability. Yet anonymity had its drawbacks. Without a named author, brilliant subtext might go unrecognized, or worse, be co-opted by the very powers it mocked. When a scathing comedy about tax collectors was performed in Antioch, the local governor simply claimed credit, repackaging the satire as his own humble critique. The crowd's knowing smirks did little to undo the theft. What's remarkable is how little the dynamics have shifted. From masked graffiti artists to blockchain-backed leakers, the dance between collective voice and individual risk continues. The core truth remains: when rebellion wears 1,000 faces, tyranny swings at shadows, and in that blur of shared ownership, dissent finds its safest harbor. Rome's elite never saw the knife coming because the hand holding it was foreign. Enter Terence, the North African playwright whose comedies sliced through Roman hypocrisy with surgical precision, all while his outsider status acted as both shield and sword. Born in Carthage and brought to Rome as an enslaved youth, Terence occupied a precarious space, respected enough to write for the aristocracy, yet just other enough to escape the full brunt of their outrage. When the eunuch mocked Roman moralists for preaching virtue while funding brothels, the laughter carried an extra layer of protection who would punish a barbarian for misunderstanding Roman values. The xenophobia that should have marginalized him instead became his armor, giving his satire a dangerous edge. This paradoxical immunity relied on Rome's own contradictions. Patricians who'd never let a fellow citizen insult them so brazenly tolerated Terence's jabs precisely because they saw him as an outsider peeking in. His plays became a form of cultural tourism, risque enough to thrill, but always framed as an African's amusing perspective rather than direct critique. In The Brothers, when a character quips, "Roman justice is like a blind beggar's bowl, always empty unless you drop coins in," the elite chuckled indulgently. What did this former slave know of their sophisticated legal system? Yet the plebeians in the cheap seats caught the truth beneath the exotic accent. Terence's greatest weapon was the stereotype itself. Roman audiences expected crude humor and slapstick from foreign writers. Think drunken barbarians and mangled Latin. Instead, he delivered razor-shit dialogue that exposed their own vices with terrifying clarity. In The Self-Tormentor, a father's obsession with his son's purity mirrors Rome's obsession with public image while ignoring private corruption. The punchline: the actor playing the hypocrite wore a Carthaginian mask, letting the audience laugh at African folly while squirming at their own reflection. But the shield wasn't unbreakable. Terence's contemporary Lucius Lanuvinus constantly accused him of plagiarism, not just as artistic rivalry, but as a way to undermine his legitimacy. The moment a foreigner's words stung too deeply, the establishment could always fall back on. He didn't even write it himself, yet Terence turned even this into fuel. His prologues directly addressed the accusations, transforming legalistic defenses into biting meta-commentary about who gets to own satire. When he joked, "If my plays are stolen, at least I steal from Greeks, unlike some Romans who steal entire provinces," the dig at imperial expansion landed safely under the cover of self-deprecation. The tragic irony, Rome eventually co-opted Terence's legacy, celebrating his exotic wit, while ignoring the systemic critiques woven into his work. His plays were taught in schools not as rebellion, but as linguistic exercises, the ultimate neutralization. Yet the template endured, from Molière's Tartuffe, banned in France but performed under papal protection in Rome, to modern immigrant satirists roasting their host countries. The outsider's license to speak truth remains one of history's sharpest double-edged swords. The moment a society dismisses critique as just how those foreigners see us, it's already admitted the truth hurts. When Dionysus strides onto the stage in the Bacchae, his voice dripping with divine amusement, the audience isn't just watching a god's revenge, they're witnessing a theological time bomb. Euripides' play dares to ask, what if the gods aren't just? What if their whims are as cruel as any tyrants? But here's the genius. By couching these dangerous questions in myth, the playwright turned heresy into high art. The moment Pentheus, the pious king, is torn apart by his own mother in a god-induced frenzy, the critique becomes unavoidable. Blind obedience to divine authority can destroy as easily as it saves. Yet because the story unfolded in the realm of legend, no politician could charge Euripides with undermining Athens' religious order without looking like they missed the point. This theological sleight of hand gave playwrights extraordinary leverage. A chorus lamenting the gods move in mysterious ways could sound devout or subtly question whether those ways were fair. In Hippolytus, when Aphrodite destroys an innocent man for failing to worship her, the audience is left grappling with divine pettiness that mirrors human vindictiveness. The real masterstroke, Euripides never had to spell out the parallel. The moment a spectator whispered, "This sounds like our leaders claiming divine mandate," the play had done its work. Heresy hid in plain sight, dressed in the robes of piety. Rome's Seneca took this further, using myth to probe moral hypocrisy. His Hercules Furens shows Juno tormenting the hero not for justice, but jealousy, a barely veiled jab at rulers who claimed moral high ground while acting on personal spite. The safety net, these weren't critiques of Rome's state religion, just philosophical explorations of Greek myths. When a character sneers, the gods excuse what they punish in mortals. The line could pass as scholarly debate unless you were Caligula, hearing your own excesses thrown back at you through Hercules' labors. The brilliance of this strategy lay in its dual audience. The devout could enjoy the spectacle of divine drama, while skeptics found ammunition for their doubts. In Prometheus Bound, when the Titan defies Zeus by giving fire to humanity, his speech, "I would rather suffer eternally than kneel to a tyrant's will," resonates far beyond Olympus. Is this a lesson about piety or a manifesto for human defiance? The ambiguity itself was the shield. What's startling is how these ancient critiques echo modern tensions. When a televangelist claims hurricanes are divine punishment, or a politician invokes God to justify war, the same questions Euripides raised still simmer. The difference, ancient playwrights understood that wrapping dissent in divine imagery didn't just protect the artist, it elevated the critique to something even tyrants hesitated to touch. After all, who wants to be the ruler caught arguing with a god? Imagine the air still thick with the weight of Antigone's tragic ending, the audience reeling from a king's downfall, their minds buzzing with uncomfortable questions about power and justice. Then, like a drunken uncle crashing a funeral, the satyr play begins. Horned, half-goat creatures tumble onto the stage, their phallic props bobbing absurdly as they slur obscene jokes. This wasn't just comic relief, it was strategic misdirection. By following searing tragedies with raunchy farces, playwrights gave censors whiplash. the crude antics of lusty satyrs overshadowing the dangerous ideas that had just been whispered in the preceding drama. The satyr play functioned like a theatrical sleight of hand. Take Cyclops, Euripides' only surviving satyr drama, staged after his devastating Trojan women. Where the tragedy laid bare the horrors of war, Cyclops turned the monster Polyphemus into a belching, wine-guzzling buffoon. The audience howled as Odysseus outwitted him with crude pranks, but the laughter served a deeper purpose. By the time officials recovered from the shock of satyrs simulating sex with wineskins, the political punch of Trojan women had already sunk into the crowd's subconscious. The vulgarity wasn't just entertainment, it was camouflage. This bait and switch relied on cultural expectations. Satyr plays were tradition, rooted in Dionysian festivals where ribaldry was practically religious duty. Censors might scrutinize a tragedy for sedition, but who'd dare police the god of wine's own raunchy rituals? Playwrights exploited this double standard ruthlessly. Aeschylus' The Austere Trilogy, a searing exploration of justice, concluded with Proteus, a lost satyr play likely mocking the very themes the tragedies treated solemnly. The contrast was deliberate. Let the heavy ideas land, then quickly blur them with bawdy chaos before authorities could connect the dots. Rome adapted this tactic with even sharper edges. The ludi scenici, theater days during religious festivals, often paired grim historical dramas with lewd mimes featuring pantomime donkeys and adulterous wives. The elite pretended to clutch their pearls at the vulgarity, while the plebeians roared. But the real magic happened in the interplay. A tragedy about corrupt senators gained plausible deniability when followed by a mime where a politician's toga accidentally revealed he wore nothing underneath. The crowd left remembering the slapstick, not the subtext, yet the subtext lingered. What's fascinating is how this ancient strategy thrives today. Think of a late-night news segment sandwiching political analysis between celebrity gossip and a viral cat video. The satyrs have traded goat skins for clickbait, but the principle remains: distraction makes dissent digestible. When a dictator can't tell if the laughter is at his expense or just at a well-timed fart joke, satire wins. And that's the satyr play's ultimate legacy, proving that sometimes the best way to smuggle truth past the gates is to wrap it in a whoopee cushion. Consider the fate of Aristophanes' Lysistrata, banned briefly in Athens for its anti-war message, then revived as a classic within decades, performed at state festivals under the same leaders it once mocked. This was the paradox of archival immunity. Time transformed subversion into scholarship, making censorship seem petty rather than prudent. Once a play entered the cultural bloodstream, attacking it was like defacing a temple, possible but politically costly. The same rulers who might jail a living satirist would fund productions of his work posthumously, because banning what others called great art risked looking like a barbarian at the gates of civilization. Rome perfected this hypocrisy. Seneca's Thyists, with its cannibalistic emperor, was too dangerous to stage under Nero. But a century later, emperors proudly quoted its lines in speeches, as if the critique had always been abstract philosophy rather than lethal allegory. The play's survival relied on a simple trick. By the time the original targets were dust, the work had gathered the patina of tradition. What was treason in one generation became required reading in the next, its edges dulled by time but its core message intact. The moment a script was copied onto enough scrolls, taught in enough schools, it gained a kind of untouchability. Even tyrants hesitated to burn what history had anointed. The real genius of archival immunity lay in its slow-motion defiance. A banned play didn't need immediate vindication, it just needed to outweight its enemies. Euripides' Medea, initially controversial for its sympathetic portrayal of a child murdering foreigner, became a staple of Greek education so thoroughly that Alexander the Great could recite it by heart. The very passages that once shocked audiences now served as rhetorical exercises, their subversive power hidden in plain sight. Like a seed lying dormant through winter, the play's critique of gender and power simply waited for warmer climates to sprout anew. This phenomenon wasn't limited to antiquity. Shakespeare's Richard Roman III, written under Tudor rule, portrays the king as a monstrous hunchback, a blatant piece of political propaganda for the reigning dynasty. Yet centuries later, long after the Tudors fell, the play endured as literature, its original agenda fading while its exploration of ambition remained razor-sharp. The same pattern repeats today. Books banned in one decade become curriculum staples in the next. Their once dangerous ideas neutered by time, but their existence a quiet rebuke to those who tried to erase them. The lesson buried in this historical irony: censorship often fails because it underestimates art's patience. A play can bide its time, weathering storms of disapproval until the very act of suppressing it seems absurd. The moment a ruler finds themselves arguing against a classic, they've already lost because the work has slipped beyond critique into the realm of cultural DNA. And nothing, not even tyranny, can edit genes already woven into the collective memory. Hamilton's opening number doesn't just introduce a founding father, it resurrects the spirit of Aristophanes, turning a hip-hop battle into a masterclass in coded rebellion. When Lin-Manuel Miranda has Lafayette rap, "I'm tacking this horse by the reins, mackin' redcoats redder with bloodstains," the lyrics pulse with the same defiant energy that once fueled Athenian comedies mocking war-hungry generals. The parallels run deeper than rhythm. Like ancient playwrights draping critiques in myth, Hamilton wraps its commentary on immigration and power in revolutionary garb, making the past a Trojan horse for present-day dissent. The moment a modern audience cheers Lafayette's verse, they're not just celebrating history, they're endorsing the play's unspoken question: who gets to write the narrative of a nation? This ancient to modern thread weaves through protest art like a hidden pattern. Consider The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's dystopian novel turned visceral TV allegory. Like Euripides displacing Athenian imperialism onto Thebes, Atwood sets a critique of patriarchal control in a fictional Gilead close enough to unsettle, distant enough to evade outright censorship. The red robes and white bonnets become contemporary versions of Greek tragic masks, symbols so potent they've been adopted by real-life protesters from Poland to Texas. When activists silently stand in legislative chambers wearing handmade costumes, they're deploying the same visual shorthand ancient choruses used, collective anonymity amplifying a message no single voice could risk shouting. Street art and murals continue this tradition of strategic ambiguity. Banksy's Flower Thrower, depicting a riot-turned bouquet, channels the duality of ancient satire, plays violent imagery softened by absurdity, leaving authorities unsure whether to arrest or applaud. In Belarus, protesters projected V for Vendetta masks onto government buildings, merging a Hollywood symbol with local resistance. These aren't just references, they're tactical updates to the playwright's toolkit, where the mask of pop culture provides the same deniability that myth once offered Sophocles. Even viral memes operate on this ancient wavelength. A dictator photoshopped onto a Game of Thrones throne or a corporate logo remixed into a protest sign, these digital satires function like Plautus' exaggerated costumes, reducing complex power structures to laughable caricatures. The shared language of internet culture creates instant complicity, mirroring how Athenian audiences bonded over recognizing Cleon in a comic buffoon. When a meme format spreads too fast to be suppressed, it achieves what archival immunity did for ancient scripts. embedding dissent so deeply in culture that removal becomes impossible. Theatre itself still weaponizes historical distance. Sweat, Lynn Nottage's Pulitzer-winning play about deindustrialization, avoided partisan finger-pointing by setting its story in 2008 close enough to resonate, far enough to let audiences lower their defenses. Like Seneca chronicling Nero's crimes through Greek myths, Nottage lets the past absorb the blow of contemporary pain. Meanwhile, The Jungle, a verbatim play about a Syrian refugee camp, uses documentary realism as its shield, just as Greek tragedians leaned on the truth of myths to ground their critiques. Music videos have become the new amphitheaters. Childish Gambino's This Is America unfolds like a tragic chorus, its joyful dancing juxtaposed with gun violence, a direct descendant of the dissonant odes in the Bacchae, where celebratory rites hide horrors. The video's viral spread proves the enduring power of art that refuses to resolve. Like Antigone's ambiguous ending, it forces viewers to sit with discomfort rather than offering easy answers. What unites these modern forms with their ancient ancestors is the alchemy of displacement. Whether through historical settings, fictional worlds, or shared symbols, artists still rely on that critical inch of distance, enough to make the medicine go down without dulling its potency. The moment a protester holds up a Hunger Games salute or a rapper samples Les Mis, they're tapping into a 3,000-year-old survival tactic. Let the story take the hit so the truth can land. And as long as power fears the crowd's murmur of recognition, the play will always go on.